Hello and welcome to Two Car Pros. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to replace the spark plugs in a Ford F150 from the year 2005 with the 5.4 liter V8. This guy will also work for pretty much any Ford with the 5.4 liter V8. Now before I get started, I want to start by saying you're going to need one of these. It is a 9/16 spark plug socket, and this one's special because of the length. It is pretty much the perfect length for the spark plug well in the head. So this one's super handy to have. I'll leave a link in the description below to it, and I'll also leave a link in the description below to the spark plugs that I used in the video. Now, I'll give this warning before we get started as well. These engines are known for having the spark plugs being bound inside the cylinder head, so breaking them off is really easy, and that's going to cause a completely different headache for you if you do that. But if you use the trick that I'm about to show you, it should go well. I managed to do all 8 without breaking a single one, and those were the original plugs in the truck, and I'm changing about 123,000. We just got this truck in second hand, so yeah, I definitely would have changed it for 126. But as long as you go slow and take your time, then you should be in the clear and you won't end up breaking any plugs off in the head. But again, this is one of those repairs that the slower you go and the more time you take, the better off you're going to be. And I'm going to show you how to do one spark plug because they're all the same, and then I remove the ECM and battery because you have to get those out of there too. At least for the F150, I'm not sure about like an Expedition or an Excursion or even a van that has the 5.4. But yeah, as long as you do what I say and go slow, you should be in the clear. Let's jump right in. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is grab your air compressor or some canned air, and we want to blow all around where the ignition coils go into the engine, because there's dirt and debris and all kinds of ugly stuff there that we don't want down in the spark plug wells when we take the ignition coils out. Okay, so now we can move on to removing the ignition coil. I'm only going to show you how to do one because they're all exactly the same. It's just if I show you how to do all 8, this video is going to get really long and really boring, and you're just going to see darkness and elbows. So I'm going to show you how to do one and then just apply that to all 8. There's really nothing, there's no magic behind it. It's just, this is going to take you a while. Don't expect to knock this out in an hour or two. This is probably one of the more involved spark plug jobs you can do, just because of how buried the engine is. So we want to take a small standard screwdriver, insert it into here on the ignition coil connector, so that relieves the safety, and now we can remove the electrical connector for the ignition coil. See how easy that is? It just pops right off. So if you missed it, I inserted my standard screwdriver right here, pushed that far down into the housing, and then just pulled the entire electrical connector off. Now we can get the bolt out that holds the ignition coil in place. Okay, so the bolt holding that ignition coil on is a 7mm bolt. It's pretty small. It's kind of hard to see. It's actually on camera, I'm so sorry. It's behind this tube, but you can just kind of follow where my socket is going. So it's north of the ignition coil housing. The bolt is just there. It's really difficult to see, and you can maybe see why I'm not showing all 8, because every single shot is going to be tricky and dark and really, really tight in there. I mean, there's really only enough space for my hands and tools. Wedging a camera in there is just not gonna happen. You're gonna need a myriad of sockets and well, maybe not sockets, but definitely a decent amount of extensions. And grab that bolt. So that's what it looks like when it comes out. Now the ignition coil should be free to remove.
There we go. Okay, so it definitely took some encouraging, but eventually, if you pull and wiggle on it enough, it does come out. Okay, so the next phase is the fun part. You need a 9/16 spark plug extracting socket. Now, this one's actually kind of special because of how long it is. It's pretty much the exact length you need. I got this on Amazon, and everybody's ranting and raving about how it made this job a lot easier, so I definitely recommend it, and I will link to it in the description. Okay, so you want to push down on your ratchet so it's perfectly seated against the nut on the spark plug, and we're going to back it up anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn, and then we'll move on to our next step. And backing it off a little bit will make sense in just a moment. Okay. So now that we have the spark plug backed off about 1/4 turn, we need to spray some carburetor spray, about 3/4 of a teaspoon down into this well. This will seep past some of the threads and help bust up the spark plug so the threads don't gall on their way out, which would mean you'd have to take the entire head off the truck, and that's an entire new can of worms you don't want to deal with. And once you've sprayed it down into that well, let it sit for at least 15 minutes to evaporate away. Okay, so now we're going to let that sit for 15. So now, with our spark plug socket on and very straight and flush with the nut, I'm using an extension here so you can see what I'm doing. We can tighten and untighten the spark plug, going back and forth about 1/4 turn each time. You may notice some screeching or high effort, and you're going to do this until it gets easier, and then you can remove the spark plug. This is a way to preserve the threads. And this is not me saying this is Ford saying this. This is straight from Ford. I'm doing like an 1/8 turn to start. And I'm going to tighten it back up. Do another turn. And tighten it back up. Yeah, I can feel it getting easier as I do this. So I know this technique is working. Oh yeah, it's getting a lot easier. It's actually getting so easy, I don't think I need the ratchet anymore. It's also important to note, don't use power tools or air tools, only use hand tools when doing a spark plug job. And there we go, there's the spark plug removed. So with our spark plug out, we can now compare it to our new one to make sure that it's identical, which it is, except this one's obviously older and used. Now the spark plugs you want were a Motorcraft SP515, but they've been superseded to SP546. So I looked for a long time to try to find 515s, but they just simply don't make them. They've been superseded to this standard, which is most likely better in every way, shape, and form. I will leave a link in the description to these spark plugs that I'm using today. Now, the trick with these, and I didn't believe this until I actually read the Ford installer's manual, is you're supposed to use nickel anti-seize, and this is important, and you're supposed to put it here in this area, not on the tip here, but in this area here. You'll see in just a second. It's supposed to just be a thin coat. I'm going to put it on the edge of my pinky finger here. And then just apply it to this area. You do not want to go past here. I'll also put a little diagram up in case it's not showing up on camera, which is more than likely because this is silver on silver. That's okay. See? So that is where the nickel anti-seize goes. Next thing we can worry about is dielectric grease, which goes on here inside of your ignition coil. You're supposed to wipe away old grease that's still on there, but this never had grease on it to start. So we're going to be applying a little bit. I'll put a okay amount like that. That's good. And then I'm going to get a screwdriver and make sure it is nice and distributed in there. Oh yes, that's perfect. Just like that. Small screwdriver. And it's nice and coated inside, see? May not be able to show up on camera too great, but it's in there, trust me. Now we can go back to installing. Okay, so I have my spark plug here. I also put a little bit of anti-seize on the thread, even though the manual didn't really say to. I'm going to anyway, just so when I take these out in the future, the threads don't gall. So we need to load up our socket with our spark plug here. There we go. Make sure that's nice and seated on there. And make sure you didn't put any anti-seize on the strap here, and these are pre-gapped. I actually don't think there is a way to gap these manually without breaking them, so don't gap them. They come perfect. Now we can install it. Now while we're installing this, we want to be very careful not to cross thread it. The threads are more gentle than you think they are, and always make sure to do this by hand. So I'm going to tighten it by hand first. That does not feel cross-threaded at all. It feels good. If it was cross-threading, it would be really, really tough to tighten. So make sure it goes in nice and easy. And then we need to grab a torque wrench. So the torque specification is 25 foot-pounds, and that's important. So make sure you torque this to the proper specification. There we go, 25 foot-pounds. Now we can install our ignition coil the exact way we removed it earlier. So I have the coil here, and we can install it. This might take a few minutes, as it was challenging to get out. So it's probably going to be challenging to get in. It's a 7mm bolt we're going to be securing the ignition coil in. Now the bolt that secures the ignition coil doesn't really have a torque spec. It's a small bolt, so finger tight's good. If you really want a torque spec, I'll make one up for you. 10 foot-pounds. There you go. Perfect. And now we can plug the ignition coil back in. Now, when you're doing all 8 plugs, it's okay to do them one at a time, and this just pushes back on. There's really no nothing tricky to it. Just pushes on, makes a nice gratifying clicking sound. Now, when you're doing all 8 plugs, it is a good idea, if you want to keep track, to do them one at a time, so that way you never mix up which cable goes where for the ignition coils, because if those were out of order, you would have a misfire situation. They are labeled with teeny tiny numbers on them though. If you do get lost, I believe, I can't see them. That one says 2 on it, so I'm pretty sure all of them have a number on it. But they're really hard to see, and the rest of them have grounded off for me. So doing them one at a time is not a bad way to go. Okay, so I finished up the right side relatively easily, doing the same technique over and over. Well, I didn't run into any problems. Now the left side looks like it's a bit problematic, because I believe this is the ECM, and that is totally in the way of getting way down in there, which you're going to need to do. And in order to get to the bolts for the ECM, you should just disconnect the battery anyway whenever you're dealing with electrics. You gotta take the battery out, and then we can take this out, and then we can get to the spark plugs in the back. So first we need to undo the negative battery terminal cable, which is an 8mm. I'm going to tuck that away down there, and now we can do the positive. I can remove this plastic battery cover. We can set this aside. Okay, so now that the battery is disconnected, we need to remove the plastic chuck that holds it kind of in place. It's down here to the right of the the battery, and it is a 8mm. We can set this chuck aside, or battery holder, whatever you want to call it, somewhere safe. And now we can remove the battery. So now it gives us access to all 4 bolts that hold the ECM in. Now I've labeled each of these 1, 2, and 3 sequentially in a line like that, because these 2 appear to be the same size, and I don't know if the plugs are the same or not, so it's a good idea to just label them, and then I labeled the 3rd one because I felt like it. So they're pretty easy. You just pull back on this gray safety and the electrical connector comes off. This is actually probably the easiest thing to do all day. So we can push these down and away. Simple rule of thumb for automotive: if something's in your way, remove it. This is in our way, so we need to remove it. Need to get all these cables out of here. If you really want to go the extra mile, you can use zip ties to further get these things out of your way, but I'm just going to push them out of the way for now. And the 4 bolts holding this in place is 10mm. So we can grab a 10mm socket and remove them. There's only 4 bolts holding them in place, and they're not even that tight, so I doubt you should replace them super tight. With that last bolt removed, we can now remove this and put this somewhere really safe. Well, shoot, that didn't help too terribly much because there's still this bracket in the way, so we need to remove that as well. Looks like there's 3 bolts holding this one on. They're all 3 10mm. Okay, with the last bolt removed, the bracket comes out. And we can set that aside. Now we have full unfettered access to the left side of the engine, where we can now remove the remaining spark plugs. It looks like there's nothing else in the way, but I will turn on the camera and let you know if there is. But it should be very straightforward, just like the other side, now that the ECM battery are out of the way. Okay, so now that all 4 on this side have been changed, all 4 spark plugs, doing exactly what I showed you before. There was really nothing special, just using different combinations of extensions to get to each and every ignition coil bolt and spark plug, and then using that technique I showed you earlier. That's really the trick of this spark plug job. I was able to get all 8 out without stripping a single one. I am a firm believer of that carb spray trick. I'd never seen that before until I looked it up today on Ford installers. So that was pretty cool, and it worked like a charm. Took them out no problem. The only issue I had was actually the rubber boots on the ignition coils coming apart, just because they get stuck inside that spark plug well. But I grabbed a pair of long nose pliers and grabbed it and was able to pull them out. I did shred one or two, but I went to my local Ford dealer and they're available for $10 a piece, so it's not the end of the world if you shred one. So all in all, I think I've saved at least a couple $100 doing this myself, because I think Ford wanted like $350 or $400 to do this job. And we're really on the back side of it. All I have to do is plug that, or put that ECM back, put the battery back, and put the air intake tube back on. I mean, that's not even 100% necessary if I just want to start and see if it starts up, because the air filter is actually in here. But yeah, this was not a terribly, insanely difficult job, just a time-consuming one. This is something that you need to realize is going to take you a while, and the slower you go, the better job you're going to do. And that's really the only piece of advice I have for you. So now we can put the ECM back in that we removed earlier, and then put the battery in, and then we can start and marvel at the fruit of our efforts. And I know I'm going to get about 140 comments about how I didn't show how to remove all 8. As I said earlier, I've already been over this, this is how I know whether or not you've watched the video, because you'll comment this comment: why didn't you show how to do the other 7? Because it would be nothing but darkness and elbows. It's really tight down in there, and it wouldn't be very compelling to watch. They're all exactly the same. It was just a little tricky to get to these ones on the left, but I showed you how to take this bracket off and how to replace it, or the ECM and the bracket. These don't really have a torque spec either, just tight is good. So now we can replace the ECM once the bracket is nice and in place. We just put it in the exact same way we removed it. It actually kind of holds on to it for you a little bit. Like that, and then we can replace the bolts. Okay, so now we have all 4 bolts back in place. Those are 10mm bolts, in case you forgot. We can plug things back in. Now you can see why I numbered things earlier, but if you didn't, that's okay. You can just kind of follow along. I'm sure you'd be able to match it up side by side. So this one goes here, and they just push on until this gray thing flips forward. It's the safety. That means it's fully plugged in. I'll do the next one. Sometimes it needs some encouragement, so you can put it on and then flip the gray thing forward. I just had both ways work. It's so weird. Nothing's ever consistent on camera. Okay, so yeah, that's better. You just put it on and then you flip the gray safety forward, and that's not coming out. So now we can replace the battery. I want to make sure it's fit in properly, and now we can replace that chuck, that plastic chuck piece that has a little 7mm bolt, this piece here. See, it grips onto the side of the battery using this, and that's what holds it in place. Tight's really good enough. Not too tight, it's kind of a small bolt. As long as the battery's not moving, which it's not, you're in good shape. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is put the battery cover back on. Guys, before you put the terminal cables on, with the battery cover back on, we can put the positive battery terminal cable back on the positive battery terminal. And tighten that up with an 8mm wrench. Pretty tight. Put the rubber boot back on. And now we can do the negative. You wonder what that woof sound was? That was my subwoofer coming back to life. That's not coming off. And there we go. Now we can start the truck. So basically you're listening for misfires, but this truck's running perfectly, so we know we've done the job correctly. If you didn't do the job correctly, the engine would be stumbling and misfired, probably be throwing some trouble codes to tell you which cylinder's not working right. But this truck is A-OK, and I can put the air intake boot back on. But that's not what this repair is about. This repair is all done.
So that's how to replace these spark plugs in a 2005 F150 with a 5.4 liter V8. You're definitely going to want to torque those spark plugs to the correct specification. I believe it was 25 foot-pounds. That's pretty essential for when you're going to be removing them in the future, if you're going to hang on to whatever vehicle that engine is in. Yeah, but like I said at the beginning of this video and during this video, just go slow and take your time. Do not be in a hurry. If you're in a hurry trying to do these plugs, you might break one off, and if you break one off, you could break the ceramic off, you could round the nut on the spark plug itself, you could gull the threads. I mean, there's just so much you could do wrong, so you need to do the trick I told you with the carburetor spray and kind of working it back and forth after you let it sit for a while. At least 15 minutes. I let it sit 25 minutes just because I'm an overachiever. Or lazy, however you want to look at it. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll catch you next time.